For 3 years I had been with Ethan and 3 times I had proposed to him. Each time he had refused. Once I overheard him telling his friends with a look of disdain, "Every time I see the scar on Grace's stomach, I think about the baby that died there. It just makes her feel dirty to me." His words pierced my heart like a dagger. Even so, I asked him for the 4th time to marry me. Chapter 1. Check out Ethan's post on social media. The guy who swore he'd never get married is saying he wants to tie the knot. The moment I saw the notification in the group chat, my hand, which had been frantically applying scar cream, froze mid-motion. My hands trembled as I opened his post. Sure enough, it was there. Just 3 simple words. I want to marry. But those 3 words had the group chat erupting like wildfire. Wow, Grace really is the queen of persistence. Did she get pregnant again and use it as leverage to corner him into marriage? God, that's so pathetic. I used to think she was just hopelessly devoted. Turns out she's manipulative too. Reading their comments, I let out a self-deprecating laugh. Maybe they were right. After 3 years of chasing him without dignity, it was no wonder everyone looked down on me. But I didn't have the luxury of caring about their ridicule right now. I needed to know, this time, was Ethan serious? I hailed a cab straight from the hospital to the place where his group was gathering. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my expression into a smile and pushed open the door to the private room. The lively chatter inside came to an abrupt halt. Ethan stubbed out his cigarette, tilted his head toward me, and gave a half-smile. "Come here," he said softly. My eyes stung with sudden tears. Blast, I thought. At last I had waited long enough. As I stepped forward, someone suddenly bumped into me from behind. I stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe, and looked up to see a young woman walking past me. She was beautiful, with an air of innocence about her. Ethan reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. His voice was warm as he introduced her to the room. "This is Victoria, your new sister-in-law. What are you all standing around for? Say hello." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water poured directly over my head. I stood there, frozen, utterly humiliated. The others exchanged glances before they began to chime in. "Nice to meet you, Victoria. Welcome to the family." Meanwhile, I stood out like a sore thumb. The only one who didn't belong. Like a fool. How could this be happening? Refusing to accept it, I pulled out the engagement ring I had been carrying and pleaded with Ethan. "Ethan, don't marry her. I'm begging you." Victoria's eyes widened in shock, while Ethan let her go. He leaned back, lazily tapping the side table with his fingers, a cold smirk playing on his lips. "All right," he said. He took the ring from my hand, but in the next second he tossed it out the window. The soft splash of the ring hitting the river below echoed in the room, and it felt like my heart stopped along with it. That ring had been custom designed, something we had chosen together. And now he had discarded it so casually. "If you want me to marry you," he said, his tone indifferent, as if he were asking for a napkin, "go fetch it from the river." One of his friends looked at me with pity. "Ethan, don't you think that's going too far?" "Yeah," another agreed. "It's freezing out there. Making her dive into the river in the middle of winter to find a ring? That's like looking for a needle in a haystack." "What if?" "My business is none of yours," Ethan snapped, silencing them. He turned to Victoria and said with a grin, "How about we make a bet? Let's see how long it takes her to find the ring." Victoria leaned in, whispering something into Ethan's ear, and the two of them burst into laughter. Their laughter chilled me to the bone, each note like shards of ice piercing my heart. Without hesitation, I turned and ran toward the river. The December waters were bitterly cold, each icy wave clawing at my skin. My throat burned as the river water filled my mouth, the taste of blood sharp against the back of my tongue. The murky depths of the river felt like the gaping maw of some monstrous abyss, threatening to swallow me whole. It was the same darkness that had consumed everything all those years ago. Ethan, I can't take this anymore. But what can I do? Marrying you is my only dream in this lifetime. I bit down on my tongue to keep myself conscious, desperately searching for the lost ring. Finally, my strength gave out and my body numbed from the cold. Ethan's friends dragged me back to the shore and handed me a blanket. I didn't even bother to wrap it around myself. Trembling, I crawled toward Ethan. He was on the sofa, locked in a tender kiss with Victoria. The kind of kiss so soft and intimate, it could melt the hearts of anyone watching. I sat silently watching. It felt like an eternity before they finally pulled apart. Summoning what little strength I had left, I lifted the ring toward him. Ethan, I found it. Ethan swatted my hand away, his voice dripping with disdain. Pathetic. And then he said it. The words that shattered everything. Let's break up, Grace. His voice was filled with nothing but loathing, each word like a nail driven into my chest. I stared at him, frozen, as the weight of his rejection sank in. Ethan, we used to love each other so much. Why can't you love me just a little longer? I begged, my voice raw and desperate. Ethan stood abruptly, his voice sharp and commanding. Shut up. Don't you dare bring up the past. You think you're still the same Grace you used to be? Every time I see that disgusting scar on your stomach, it makes me want to vomit. Do you know what it reminds me of? That you lost our child. That you're filthy. Each word was like a blade, slicing into me, leaving wounds that ran straight to my soul. Tears mixed with the river water still dripping from my body as I clutched the blanket tightly around me, trying to cover my stomach. My voice broke as I tried to explain. Ethan, it's not like that. Chapter 2. The scar that sprawls across my stomach like a menacing centipede. It's hideous, no doubt about it. But in truth, it's the proof of Ethan's and my once deep love. Years ago, his mother disdained me for being an orphan. Ethan, in defiance of his family, chose to marry me regardless. But no one expected that on our wedding day, tragedy would strike. Ethan was in a car accident and I disappeared. For 6 long months I vanished. When I returned, that scar had already marked my body. Everyone believed the worst of me. They said I was a gold digger who ran away when Ethan was in trouble, only to come crawling back after being dumped by someone else. From then on, love crumbled into nothing but resentment and revenge. What Ethan didn't know was that after the accident, his life was hanging by a thread. He needed a kidney transplant to survive, and I was his donor. Those 6 months, I was in hiding, recovering from the surgery, but I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell him because I was dying end-stage kidney failure. I didn't want his guilt or sorrow to haunt him after I was gone. All I wanted was to spend my remaining days by his side, to finish the wedding we never had. But now, with only a week left to live, he still refuses to marry me. The private room was filled with the sound of my quiet sobs, but Ethan remained unmoved. Gripping my chin tightly, he asked coldly, "What kind of woman are you, really?" I faltered, unable to bring myself to say the truth. Ethan scoffed, then pulled Victoria into his arms and left without looking back. I couldn't hold on any longer. My body gave out and I collapsed to the floor. When I woke up again, I was in the hospital. Dr. Daniel, my attending physician, was furious as he informed me, "You had a high fever all night, and it has severely worsened your condition. Whether you can survive tonight depends on sheer luck." A short sigh escaped my lips. So soon. But I still hadn't had my wedding with Ethan. Dying like this, wouldn't that be too cruel a regret? I gave him a bitter smile and begged Dr. Daniel to keep my condition a secret. Ignoring his protests, I forced my way out of the hospital and returned to the house Ethan and I once shared. As soon as I walked in, I saw Ethan sitting on the couch. His cold gaze bore into me like a blade. "Why didn't you just die out there? What are you doing back here?" His words cut through me like ice. I shivered, thinking to myself, I really am about to die. I ignored the searing pain in my chest and spoke softly. Ethan, I agree to break up with you. I won't bother you anymore. But I have one condition. You must give me a wedding, not a real one, no need to register it legally. Just put a ring on my finger, as if you were my husband. My voice trembled with caution, though I already knew what his answer would be. Still, for one last time, I clung to the faintest glimmer of hope. Fine, he said. His unexpected response made my heart skip a beat. I quickly promised, after the wedding, I'll disappear for good. I won't interfere with you and Miss Jiang. But as soon as the words left my mouth, Ethan's expression darkened. He gritted his teeth and spat. What a convenient deal. Grace, I swear at that wedding, I'll play the perfect husband for you. The way he emphasized play was excruciating. It was a blow my heart and soul could barely withstand. But I was content. Ethan's hatred for me had reached its peak. He arranged for the wedding to take place that very night. It was just as well. I might not even make it to tomorrow. The metallic taste of blood crept into my mouth. I swallowed a handful of pills to suppress the waves of pain crashing through me. Then I slipped into a wedding dress and headed to the venue. But when I arrived, there were no flowers, no guests, no sign of Ethan. Had I come too late? I staggered through the entire hall, searching frantically, but he was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to call him, the massive screen in the center of the hall flickered to life. The image that appeared froze me in place. There he was, Ethan, wearing a sharp suit, kneeling on one knee before Victoria in her white dress. Victoria, will you marry me? I, Ethan, swear to the heavens that I will love only you, forever and always. I will never betray you. The familiar words of a wedding vow, now sharpened into daggers, pierced my heart. I collapsed to the ground, unable to believe what I was seeing. Once again, Ethan had toyed with me, and I, foolish, naive me, had fallen for it. The blood I had been holding back gushed out uncontrollably, and the searing pain in my body felt like I was being torn apart. I lifted my head with all my strength, desperate for one last glimpse of Ethan. But he was nowhere to be seen. And then everything went dark. I was gone. I died in the lonely silence of the night, unnoticed by anyone. Later, an ambulance took my lifeless body to the hospital. I hovered above, watching as Dr. Daniel fought desperately to save me. When he finally collapsed to the floor in tears, my heart ached. Dr. Daniel, thank you, I whispered softly. But he couldn't hear me. He searched my belongings and found my phone. After glancing at it, he made a call on his own phone. I leaned in to see who it was. It was Ethan. Who's this? Ethan answered quickly. No. I tried to stop Dr. Daniel from delivering the news, but it was in vain. Mr. Gu, this is Grace's attending physician. Please come to the hospital as soon as possible to see her. The hospital? Attending physician? Ethan sneered. What's this? Another ploy? Playing the sympathy card now. What's next? Are you going to tell me she's dying? Well, tell her this. If she's dying, she'd better do it far away from me. I don't want her filth polluting my sight. Chapter 3. Dr. Daniel put down the phone, his face etched with disbelief. I murmured softly, Ethan still hates me to his very core. So be it. Leaving is the best ending after all. I didn't expect to be pulled right in front of Ethan the very next second. Inside the lavishly decorated villa. He tossed his phone aside, turned, and gripped Victoria's delicate shoulders, forcing her down onto the sofa. Victoria let out a coquettish gasp, her eyes brimming with seduction as she clung to Ethan. She laughed as she brushed her lips against his. Aren't you afraid Grace will really be angry enough to leave for good this time? What if she never comes back? Ethan sneered indifferently. She didn't care about my anger back then when she ran off with another man, ended up pregnant, dumped, and then came crawling back to marry me. treating me like a garbage bin, disgusting. And I can't even get some payback. His thumb traced along Victoria's crimson lips. I've got a small heart. It only has room for one person, but it can't tolerate even a sliver of betrayal. If she runs off this time, great. I'll finally be rid of her. Standing to the side, I listened, and in that moment I understood. This was just another act of revenge against me. I should have known all along. He's so eager to rid himself of me. Now that I'm truly gone, there's no one left to entangle him. He should feel relieved, shouldn't he? That's what I'd hoped for too. So why does it still hurt? Looking at the man I once loved deeply, I whispered softly, I wish you happiness, Ethan. I hope you and the one you love stay together forever. For the next several days, Ethan spent his time shuttling between the club and Victoria's house. He didn't return to the residence we once shared, the one he mockingly called Gracie's Haven. Another night of revelry, and the group sprawled carelessly across the club's leather sofas. Someone piped up, Ethan, that stunt you pulled ditching Grace at the wedding? That must have been so satisfying. She's probably hiding somewhere, crying her eyes out right now. Ethan swirled his glass of whiskey with a smirk, but his chiseled face was shrouded in the dim light, obscuring whatever emotion might have flickered there. Another chimed in, that gold digger Grace. She must be going crazy knowing she let the jackpot slip through her fingers. Probably out there frantically looking for a way back. Women like her are the worst. You've got to keep them hanging. Exactly. With her kind, you just have to play hardball. The group grew more animated, their words harsher by the minute. I stood nearby, invisible to them, hearing every cruel word. My chest tightened with a dull ache. Don't worry, I whispered to myself. I'll never bother him again. Just as I was about to drift away, there was a loud crash. Ethan's glass shattered against the floor, pieces scattering like shards of ice. He shot to his feet, his expression cold and cutting. Shut the hell up, all of you. The room fell silent, everyone stunned. I, too, stared at Ethan in confusion. He spoke again, his voice sharp. Grace is mine. Only I can insult her. What gives you the right to bring her up? Don't you worry about dirtying your mouths. The group immediately forced awkward smiles. Of course, Ethan. That was out of line for us. Yeah, our bad. Don't be mad. I froze for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh. I allowed myself to sink deeper into the shadows. Life is always so contrary to our wishes. Once I didn't want to leave Ethan, but I had no choice. Now I want to leave him to stop clinging on, but I'm trapped here, forced to linger around him every moment. That night, Ethan did something unexpected. He returned to Gracie's Haven, but it didn't seem like he slept well. In the dead of night, he suddenly awoke from a restless dream. He reached for his phone and glanced at it. The screen was filled with missed calls and messages from Victoria. He'd overdone it the night before and hadn't gone to her place. He should call her back now to smooth things over. But to my surprise, Ethan furrowed his brows in irritation and without hesitation, blocked her number. I was stunned. Weren't they supposed to be madly in love? Ready to spend their lives together? Still puzzled, I saw him open our old chat history. The last message was from the night before the wedding. In the past, no matter how much he humiliated or lashed out at me, I'd always text him the next day, testing the waters, trying everything I could to appease him. I was terrified he'd abandon me. But this time 5 days had passed and I hadn't reached out. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. He typed a question mark into the chat box, then deleted it. Getting out of bed, he summoned a housekeeper and asked, "Has Grace come back in the past few days?" The housekeeper replied, "Miss Grace hasn't returned since she left wearing her wedding dress that day." Ethan's face darkened instantly. "She's been gone for days, and you didn't think to tell me earlier?" Well, the housekeeper stammered, unable to explain. They only ever acted based on Ethan's attitude. Since he treated me with disdain and contempt, the servants naturally followed suit, disregarding me entirely. I couldn't blame them for that. "Get out," Ethan snapped, waving them away. Once alone, he sat back on the bed, muttering, "Gone, huh? Good. I hope you never come back this time. At least you won't be in my way." For some reason, I detected a trace of sorrow in his voice, but I quickly dismissed the thought. Ethan despised me to the core. Why would he feel sad about my leaving? That night, Ethan drove out. He sped down the streets recklessly, his frustration evident. For the first time, I saw this side of him. It made me uneasy. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Ethan! Ethan, slow down!" But he couldn't hear me. At that moment, someone darted across the intersection, running a red light. Ethan saw the figure and swerved violently to avoid them. The car swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding the pedestrians, only to head straight toward a concrete wall. "Ethan!" Without thinking, I lunged forward, trying to shield him. But I forgot. I was just a spirit incapable of stopping anything. Bang! The car's front smashed into the wall with a deafening crash. The ambulance rushed him to the hospital for emergency treatment. I followed him into the operating room, my anxiety unbearable, yet I could do nothing but stay by his side, clutching his hand tightly and calling out his name over and over again. Thankfully, the airbag had deployed in time. Ethan's life was spared, though his leg injury was severe. After hours of surgery, Ethan finally regained consciousness. But to my surprise, the first thing he said when he opened his eyes was, "Grace, you're back." His gaze darted around the room, filled with an almost frantic excitement, only to darken when he found no one familiar. Suddenly, he grabbed the nurse adjusting his fore and demanded, "Where's Grace? Where is she?" "Grace." The nurse was baffled and shook her head. "Who are you talking about?" "My girlfriend." "Ethan." His friends came into the room then, their expressions heavy with unease. One of them finally spoke. "Grace isn't here. It's been 24 hours since your accident, and she hasn't shown up. She's probably, just like before, gone again." Ethan's face turned grim, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he let out a bitter laugh. "Of course. That's Grace for you. How ridiculous of me to even hope, to even think she might be here this time." I shook my head desperately, my ghostly form trembling as I screamed at him, "I'm here, Ethan. I've been here the whole time." I wanted so badly to tell him I'd never left, never abandoned him. But no matter how loud I shouted, Ethan couldn't hear me. In the end, all I could do was sob helplessly. Fate truly had a cruel sense of humor. I was right here by his side, yet he had no way of knowing. His friends, oblivious to my presence, began cursing me on his behalf. "That shameless woman. Good riddance. Yeah, the further she stays away, the better." I slumped against the wall, listening as they tore into me, their words cutting deeper than any blade. As night fell, I finally rose from the corner, my spirit drained and hollow. To my horror, I noticed my translucent form had grown even fainter. Was my time as a ghost running out? A soft groan escaped Ethan as he stirred in his sleep, his brows furrowing in pain. I floated to his side, wanting to smooth away his troubled expression. But then in his sleep he muttered, "Grace, I hate you." My entire being shuddered, and a wave of grief crashed over me, consuming me entirely. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I've let you down again. I'm so sorry." A cold, wet sensation trailed down my cheek. Startled, I realized even spirits could shed tears. I reached up to wipe them away and noticed my hands had grown even more transparent. Could this fading be tied to Ethan's feelings for me? The more he resented me, the closer I came to disappearing completely. I cupped his face, memorizing every line, every feature, as my heart ached with a sorrow that felt endless. The next morning, the doctors arrived for their rounds, but Ethan was already demanding to be discharged. His friends tried to persuade him to stay, but he was adamant. Just as I was beginning to panic, Daniel walked in. His tone was calm yet firm as he said, "If you still care about anything, Ethan, then take care of yourself. Don't let Grace's sacrifices go to waste." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes blazing with anger. "So you're in on this too, Dr. Daniel? Helping Grace lie to me? You call what she did sacrifices? Running off with another man every time I hit rock bottom? Is that what you mean by sacrifice? That kind of woman isn't worth a shred of my concern." I had heard these words from him many times before, yet they still cut me to the core. Daniel, however, didn't back down. "Grace isn't like that. Have you ever thought that maybe she had no other choice?" Ethan sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "No other choice? What excuse could a selfish woman like her possibly have? She deserves to die," he spat. "And from now on, I don't want to hear her name ever again." Every word felt like a dagger, slicing me apart piece by piece. I clenched my fists, tears streaming down my face. Perhaps it was better this way. If Ethan could forget me completely, he might finally move on and start fresh. And when that happened, I would disappear entirely, leaving this world for good. Ethan insisted on being discharged. The moment he got home, he ordered my belongings to be gathered and burned. "That faithless woman," he said coldly. "Even seeing her things makes me sick." The housekeeper, who had just returned, tried to intervene. "Young master, Grace truly loved you. Her heart was always with you. She had been with us the longest, witnessing the happiness Ethan and I had once shared." Though I returned carrying a tarnished reputation, the housekeeper had seen all the things I had done for Ethan and had been moved by them. "Loved me?" Ethan laughed mockingly. "If she truly loved me, then why did she run away every time I needed her?" "Well," the housekeeper faltered, unable to find an answer. "And me? I was already shattered beyond repair." "I didn't, Ethan. I never ran away. I've always been here," I whispered, knowing he couldn't hear me. Consumed by rage, he picked up a small box from the floor. It was an old photo box, filled with snapshots of the life we once shared. We climbed Mount Tai together, and the Tsongshan Mountains in Dali. Every time we reached a summit, he would pull me closer for a picture, saying that one day when we grew old, we would look back on these memories together. Those were the sweet, beautiful moments we shared. "No, stop. Don't burn those." I tried desperately to stop him, crying and pleading, my eyes brimming with bloodshot tears. But Ethan remained unmoved, pouring the photos into the fire pit. As the flames devoured them, I felt my body grow lighter and more translucent, nearly fading into nothingness. I was disappearing for good. "Goodbye, Ethan. Grace, the biggest regret of my life," Ethan said through gritted teeth, "is falling in love with you. I'll forget you completely forever." He emptied the box into the flames, his anger unrelenting. Suddenly, among the burning items, a plain, unmarked envelope caught fire, its outer layer curling away to reveal the documents inside. The words "will" and "donation agreement" were clearly visible. Chapter 6. What is that? Leaning on his cane, Ethan hesitated for a moment, then quickly reached into the fire and pulled the documents out. The donation agreement was dated on the very day he had received his kidney transplant. The donor. His eyes darted to the section for the donor's name. There it was, Grace. Ethan froze, his entire frame trembling. Grace. How could it be her? At that moment, my nearly transparent form began to solidify again. I stared at the document in disbelief. I had sealed these papers away and tossed them into the storage room. No one should have found them, let alone placed them in that box. Then I noticed the teary-eyed housekeeper standing by, and suddenly I understood. She had secretly saved them for me. Ethan. Victoria appeared suddenly, helping Ethan steady himself. Ethan, what's wrong? Did you Did you find out about Grace meeting another man at a hotel? What did you just say? Ethan's bloodshot eyes locked onto Victoria as he grabbed her by the collar. Startled, Victoria shakily pulled a stack of photos from her coat pocket. My friend took these. Grace and another man, going into a hotel together. Ethan grabbed the photos and stared at them. The woman in the pictures looked strikingly like me, and she was passionately kissing a man as they entered a couple's hotel. No, that's not me, I shouted in desperation, but no one could hear me. This, Victoria hesitated, then pointed to the donation agreement in Ethan's hand. That's all fake. She forged it to manipulate your gratitude and keep leeching off you while supporting her lover. Even the man confessed to it. Ethan glanced at Victoria, then at the donation agreement and finally at the photos. His face turned cold and unreadable. That woman. She's utterly shameless. Even this she had to lie about. Love, hate. In the end, it's all just a joke. Ethan suddenly seemed to age several years as he spoke. He raised his hand and tossed the photos, the donation agreement, and the will into the fire. Then he turned to Victoria. We'll hold the wedding at the end of the month. He didn't believe me after all. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head as I closed my eyes, waiting to vanish again. But then a familiar pull. Bachelor's night. Everyone raised their glasses to toast Ethan. Finally, Ethan. A new chapter, a new romance. From now on, it's all happiness and peace for you. Exactly. Ethan held his glass, but his expression was distant, shadowed. He thought he'd feel happy. When Grace had clung to him, he had felt nothing but disgust and irritation, consumed by the desire to retaliate and free himself of her. But now that she was gone, the emptiness in his chest felt unbearable, as though his ribcage had collapsed inward. Shouldn't be like this. Grace, that despicable woman, didn't deserve this from him. He tilted his head back and drained his glass, then reached for another. As the night deepened, Ethan stumbled out of the private room, seeking air. But as he turned the corner, he bumped into someone. Are you blind? How dare you run into me? The man's tone was hostile. Ethan's eyes turned cold as he swung a fist without hesitation. Caught off guard, the man staggered back, his expression twisting with rage as he called for his friends to join in. Drunk and outnumbered, Ethan was quickly overpowered and shoved to the ground. Bastard! I'll make sure you're finished. The man raised his foot, aiming a vicious kick toward Ethan's kidney. Ethan braced himself for the worst, until someone suddenly stepped in, blocking the blow. I've called the police. You better think carefully about the consequences. The group scattered instantly, leaving Ethan and the stranger behind. The man helped Ethan to his feet. It's you. Ethan recognized him. It was Daniel, the doctor who had once lied to cover for Grace. Daniel turned to leave. Wait, Ethan called out. Daniel stopped but didn't turn back. Don't thank me. I didn't save you for your sake. I just didn't want Grace's sacrifice to go to waste. Ethan froze for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh. Not this again. I've told you before. She was a liar, the most vile and deceitful person I've ever known. All her so-called sacrifices? Lies. All of it. Daniel shook his head slowly. You'll believe anything some people say, but when it comes to others, you refuse to trust them at all. You're a fool. He glanced up at the sky and murmured almost to himself, and for someone like you she gave everything. That makes her the bigger fool. I opened my mouth but no words came out. He wasn't wrong. 3 days ago I had faded away because of Ethan's love and hatred. It was Daniel, with his unwavering care for his patients, who brought me back. I had been drawn to Daniel's side, only to find him clutching my photo as he drank, alternating between cursing me for leaving him tasks even in death and hoping I might come back to life. I never thought my death would have such a profound impact on him. Yet back then in my foolish heart, I still clung to the hope of seeing Ethan one last time. Tonight, Daniel crossed paths with Ethan. For a brief moment I felt a flicker of joy. Perhaps my wish was granted. But before I could savor the moment, Ethan's voice, dripping with disdain, shattered the illusion. It was clear he had completely let go. And so should I. Ethan called Daniel a lunatic and stormed off. Instinctively, I wanted to follow him, but then I saw Victoria rushing over to support Ethan. "Ethan, what happened? You're hurt," she asked, her face full of worry. Ethan looked at her and, without warning, pulled her into a tight embrace and kissed her. I clenched my fists, turned away, and left with Daniel. I didn't see what happened next, how Ethan abruptly pushed Victoria away. "I've had too much to drink tonight. I'm heading home." "You should go home early too," he said coldly. Chapter 7 Section 8. After Victoria left, Ethan leaned against a wall, smoking a cigarette. His mind replayed Daniel's words and the donation papers. Logic told him it was impossible for Grace to have wronged him, but he still decided to investigate. He made a call. Find out who donated their kidney to me all those years ago. And check, back then and now, who Grace supposedly ran away with. "Grace, you fooled everyone into thinking you sacrificed for me. I'm going to expose the ugly truth behind your lies." The wedding plans continued. Ethan and Victoria went to a bridal boutique. Victoria chose a pale ivory mermaid gown and asked Ethan, "What do you think, Ethan?" Ethan seemed lost for a moment before sneering. "Hideous. It doesn't suit you. Pick something else." I stood off to the side, silently watching. That gown. Wasn't it the one I had chosen for myself back then? I couldn't help but think he really does hate me that much. "What are you doing here?" Ethan turned and noticed Daniel. His tone was sharp and irritated. "You seem to pop up everywhere." Daniel rolled his eyes. "The feeling's mutual. I'd rather not see you either." Then, with a smirk, he glanced toward my direction. "But someone here insisted on coming. If I didn't know he was here helping his cousin pick out clothes, I might have thought he could actually see me." "Ethan." Victoria suddenly grabbed Ethan's sleeve, her gaze darting to where Daniel had looked. Perhaps overwhelmed by guilt, she raised a delicate hand to her forehead, feigning dizziness. "Ethan, I'm feeling a little lightheaded." Without hesitation, Ethan scooped her up in his arms and walked out. I stood there quietly watching. For once I didn't feel heartbroken. Back at the hospital with Daniel, his phone suddenly rang. It was my phone. Daniel had been keeping it since my family hadn't been able to reach me. I leaned over to see the message. It was from Ethan. "I'm marrying Victoria at the end of the month. Isn't money what you love most? If you show up, I'll give you $1 million. Ha! He really thinks I'm just a gold digger." I chuckled softly and murmured, "Too bad I can't make it. But Ethan, I'll still wish you and Victoria happiness in my heart." Suddenly, an invisible force pulled me away. When my awareness returned, I saw Victoria standing with a man dressed as a Taoist priest. The priest held a wooden sword, chanting under his breath. In front of him on a table was a white ceramic urn, my ashes. "Grace, even in death you still cling to Ethan. You're utterly shameless." Victoria spat venomously at my urn. She turned to the Taoist priest. "Master, make sure to destroy her soul completely." So that's why I'd been pulled here. She was spooked by Daniel earlier and decided to steal my ashes to perform some ritual. How pathetic. I sat to the side, watching as they continued their farce. "What are you doing?" A familiar voice suddenly rang out. Ethan strode in, his long legs quickly closing the distance. His gaze swept over the Taoist priest and my urn before narrowing. "What the hell is going on here?" Victoria froze but quickly regained her composure. "Oh, it's just a friend of mine who passed away." She shot a quick glance at the urn and added, "She was a vile woman just like Grace, cheating on her boyfriend with 7 or 8 men." In the end, she caught a filthy disease and died miserably. Out of pity, I thought I'd do her a favor and find someone to help her move on. Ethan's expression darkened with disgust. A woman like that? Why waste your time? She deserves to be ground into dust and sent to hell. With that, he strode forward, picked up the urn, and raised it as if to smash it. Don't! Daniel, who had suspected something was off with Victoria, had followed her. He burst in just in time to see this scene. Without a second thought, he lunged forward to grab the urn from Ethan. The two men quickly descended into a fist fight, punching and kicking as they wrestled for control of the urn. I was frantic. Dear Daniel, you don't have to fight him. Breaking the urn won't affect me. But Daniel couldn't hear me. He kept fighting with everything he had. I felt my eyes well up. I thought no one in this world cared about me anymore. But now I realized. Guards! Ethan roared, summoning his bodyguards to pull Daniel away. Daniel was dragged to the ground, disheveled and battered. Yet he didn't care, shouting, I swear if you smash it, you'll regret it. Regret? Ethan sneered coldly. That word doesn't exist in my vocabulary. Even though Grace had deceived and let him down time and time again, treating him like a fool, Ethan never regretted falling in love with her. If anything, it was Grace who should regret it. She would never find someone else who loved her so deeply and gave so much without reservation. The thought of Grace filled him with even deeper resentment. Ethan raised the urn high above his head and smashed it violently to the ground. Crash! The porcelain shattered, and the fine white ashes scattered, carried away by the wind in an instant. I watched it all, feeling as if something in my own heart had been swept away with the breeze. Just then Ethan's phone rang. He picked up. Hello. Boss, we've uncovered the truth. The person who donated their kidney to you all those years ago, it was Miss Grace. What did you say? Ethan's voice was filled with disbelief. It's true. It was Miss Grace. The doctor confirmed it. After your car accident, when no suitable donor could be found, she begged the doctor to test her for compatibility. Turned out she was a perfect match. To ensure you wouldn't refuse or feel guilty, she chose to donate anonymously. After the surgery, to keep you from finding out, she left for another city to recover. She left for another city. Ethan's face turned ashen, and he stumbled backward, collapsing to the ground. That's impossible. His assistant sent him the evidence they'd uncovered. Ethan stared intently at his phone, tears streaming down his face. It was real. That donation form was real. She didn't leave me for someone else. It was me. I was the one who wronged her. When she came back, I humiliated her, insulted her, and hurt her again and again. I made her dive into freezing water to retrieve a ring, mocked her scar, crushed her spirit, and even turned our wedding into a cruel joke. How much pain must she have endured back then? I'm sorry. I didn't know. Regret and anguish crashed over him, suffocating and relentless. Ethan fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. After a long while, his cheeks wet with tears, he gave an order. Find her. Immediately. And prepare the grandest, most extravagant wedding. I'll make it up to her. I'll propose to her in public, not just once, but 10 or 20 times if I have to. If she's still angry and refuses, if she wants me to jump into a river or even into the ocean, I'll do it without hesitation, as long as she forgives me. He was desperate to see me, now that he knew it had all been a misunderstanding. But it was too late. His assistant hesitated before saying, Boss, Miss Grace. After donating her kidney, she developed severe kidney failure. She's been quietly receiving treatment all these years. But 10 days ago, her condition worsened and she passed away. What? Ethan froze, paralyzed by the words. He couldn't believe it. He refused to believe it. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the shattered urn he had just smashed. He suddenly remembered how Daniel had urged him to see Grace one last time, and how Daniel had warned that he would regret it if he didn't. Realization hit him like a lightning bolt. Ethan scrambled over to gather the scattered ashes, his hands bleeding from shards of porcelain, oblivious to the pain. But the fine white ashes slipped through his fingers, caught by the wind and carried away once again. "No!" he cried out, punching the ground with clenched fists. "Gracie! Gracie, I was wrong. Don't go, please don't leave me." I stepped closer, standing beside him, my voice calm and steady. "Ethan, let it go. Love, hatred, it's all time to let go." Ethan suddenly looked up, as if he'd heard my voice. His lips moved as though he wanted to say something, but I had already turned away, leaving with Daniel by my side. The next time I saw Ethan was at a wedding. His wedding to Victoria. It was a grand, extravagant affair, drawing a massive crowd of onlookers. Daniel and I were among them. I watched with a heart as still as water, until suddenly, the central screen lit up with a video of Victoria in an intimate moment with another man. The crowd erupted in shock. "What's going on? The bride is with another man. How shameless! Disgusting! Absolutely disgraceful!" Victoria was frantic, running to the screen to try to block the footage. "Don't look. It's fake. Don't watch it." She turned to Ethan, pleading, "Ethan, you have to believe me. I didn't betray you. This is all a setup." Ethan smirked, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold smile. "You're right. It is a setup. I created those videos myself." Victoria stared at him in disbelief, retreating step by step. "So, you never intended to marry me? This wedding, it was all just to humiliate me? To avenge Grace?" Ethan let out a low chuckle, his silence confirming her worst fears. Victoria glanced at him, then at the murmuring crowd below, before letting out a hysterical laugh filled with despair. But then suddenly, she pointed a trembling finger at Ethan. "You wanted revenge on me, but what about yourself? You're the one who hurt Grace the most. She loved you so deeply, gave you a kidney, and yet you let a few malicious lies turn you against her. If it weren't for your blind cruelty, how would I have had the chance to set her up? Ethan, you're the one who deserves to suffer the most." Her words hung in the air, cutting deep. Smack! A sharp slap rang out, silencing the crowd. Evelyn, Ethan's mother, rushed forward from the audience, glaring furiously at Victoria. "How dare you spew such nonsense? What? My son deserves to die? You shut your mouth." "Ha!" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. He looked at his mother with a cold, piercing gaze and said, "She's right. The one who deserves to die the most is me. It was me who failed to anticipate that you would manipulate me while she was recovering after donating her kidney to save me. You planted doubts, made me believe she was cheating on me. Countless times I saw the pain and sorrow in her eyes, but I dismissed it as an act. Even when she died, I crushed her ashes with my own hands and scattered them. I'm nothing but a bastard. How dare I live, using her kidney to survive?" As he spoke, Ethan pulled out a knife. No one had time to react before he raised it and plunged it into his own abdomen with force. The scene erupted into chaos. But in the end, Ethan didn't die. Daniel arrived just in time to save him. Daniel told him coldly, "You don't deserve to die alongside her." Later, Ethan returned everything he had taken from Victoria. He even went so far as to hire someone to infect her with a filthy disease, just as she had once falsely accused me. He knelt by my grave, his lips curling into a faint smile, tears glistening in his eyes. "Gracie, do you see this? I avenged you. In our next life, you must wait for me, okay? But some emotions are too heavy, too overwhelming for me to bear. In the next life, I don't want to meet him again." Perhaps it was because I had finally let go of all attachments, but my body began to fade, becoming transparent. In the end, under the sunlight, I dissolved into countless shimmering specks of light. If there is a next life, I want to be a girl as carefree and radiant as a sunflower.